great explorers of the world, James Cook. James Cook was a British navigator, explorer, and cartographer who worked for the Royal Navy. He sailed and mapped a great part of the South Pacific. Cook made detailed maps of Newfoundland before making 3 voyages to the Pacific Ocean. He established the first recorded European contact with the eastern coastline of Australia and the Hawaiian Islands. He accomplished the first recorded circumnavigation of New Zealand. Captain James Cook was born near Whitby in Marton on October the 27th, 1728. His father was called James Cook. He was a farm labourer from Ednam in Roxburghshire. His mother's name was Grace Pace, and she came from Thornaby-on-Tees. He was married to Elizabeth Batts for 16 years. They had 6 children: James, Nathaniel, Elizabeth, Joseph, George, Hugh, but 2 of them died when they were very young. He was killed by natives at Kealakekua Bay in the Hawaiian Islands on February the 14th, 1779, at the age of 50. In 1745, at the age of 16, Cook moved 20 miles to the fishing village of Staithes. There he learned to be an apprentice as a shop boy and worked for the grocer and haberdasher William Sanderson. Historians have speculated that this is where James Cook felt the first attraction for the sea while he was gazing out of the shop window. As part of his apprenticeship, Cook applied himself to the study of algebra, geometry, trigonometry, navigation, and astronomy, all skills that he would need one day to command his own ships. His family were quite poor, so after that, when he was 17, he joined the Sandersons' friends, the Walker family in Whitby. They were prominent local ship owners and Quakers. He helped them ship coal along the coast between the River Tyne and the River Thames in London, and that was his first experience as a seaman. Though he did well and was advancing in the merchant navy, Cook yearned for more. He wanted to travel. Because of his excellent sailing, navigation, and astronomy skills, he decided to enlist in the Royal Navy and joined them in 1755, just at the start of the 7 Years' War. That's where he learned to sail and charter the seas. It was during that war that James became a master at map making. His ability at surveying, navigating, and creating large, accurate maps was noticed by those high up in the Navy, and the Admiralty realized how useful he could be to the Royal Society. In 1766, England's Royal Society finally decided to commission him as commander of H.M. bark Endeavour for the first of 3 Pacific voyages. The ship was a collier that was typically used for carrying coal. It wasn't fast, but it was durable and could carry a lot of supplies. Captain Cook had a great challenge to hold before leaving. It was called scurvy. That disease caused people's gums to bleed and sores around their mouths which could lead to death. It made terrible victims on most ships making long voyages, and nobody knew how to fight it. Cook introduced some rigid and innovative rules in order to keep his crew healthy and safe. He required his men to bathe every day. The ship was to be kept very clean, and the bedding to be aired twice a week. He also brought lots of fresh fruit to keep his men from getting scurvy, and he obliged them to eat sauerkraut. Because it is pickled, it can be kept in jars and will not go bad. Cook brought a lot of sauerkraut on his voyages, but the crew didn't want to eat it at first. Some were even whipped for refusing to eat. These rules and planning helped his men to stay healthy throughout the long voyages ahead. For the first voyage, he was sent to Tahiti. Cook's mission there was officially to observe and record the transit of Venus across the Sun for the benefit of Royal Society inquiry. This would help astronomers calculate the distance between the Sun from the Earth and provide a good means of determining longitude with as much precision as possible. The expedition sailed from England on the 26th of August, 1768, rounded Cape Horn, and continued westward across the Pacific to arrive at Tahiti on the 13th of April, 1769. The crew comprised as many as 80 seamen, but there were also 11 scientists to go with them. In Tahiti, Cook and his crew received a warm welcome from the population, who came to them with fruits and beautiful girls in their outrigger canoes. The rest of the journey to Tahiti was fairly uneventful, Endeavour arriving in Matavai Bay on April the 13th to a welcoming crowd of canoes. Knowing they would be there a long time, and having heard about the experiences of Wallis, John Gore, his third lieutenant who had sailed with Wallis, and others, Cook drew up a list of rules for his men concerning their trading with and treatment of the islanders. Despite some minor incidents, the observations of the Venus transit were finally made. Yet the result of the observations was not as conclusive or accurate as had been hoped. Once the observations were completed, Cook opened the sealed orders which had been given to him before leaving. They were additional instructions from the Admiralty for the second part of his voyage. He then discovered that the real secret reason of his voyage was to search the South Pacific for signs of the great southern continent, which was postulated to be a rich land in the southern hemisphere that counterbalanced the other continents. It was commonly called Terra Australis. However, even when going further than the 14th degree south latitude, he never found such thing as the great southern continent, and so he finally headed for the west. In October the 6th, 1769, they found land at last, and immediately thought that they had reached the long-lured southern continent. Cook mapped the complete coastline, making only some minor errors. He explored the inland and gave a number of detailed accounts of what they found. They described its inhabitants, the animals, and the great variety of exotic plants which grew there. But as he continued along the coast to the north on a deeper exploration of the land, he realized that this was only the eastern coast of a place which had already been identified on the maps before, but was left imprecise on that side. What's more, he saw that the land was actually separated in two parts by a Detroit. He later called it the Detroit of Queen Charlotte, and then it became the Detroit of Cook. This meant that this was not the southern continent that they expected, but simply an island. It would later be called New Zealand. He then voyaged west again, and after 20 days of sailing, they were the first Europeans ever to reach the southeastern coast of what would be called New Holland and later Australia. On April the 29th, 1770, after setting foot on the Australian soil, he found a great variety of animals, including the kangaroo, plants and vegetation. So Cook finally decided to call that part Botanist Harbour and then Botany Bay. He claimed the whole island for the British Crown, calling it New Holland. Then they continued north along the coast. The sea was very rough, so they were nearly shipwrecked on the Great Barrier Reef. Fortunately, they managed to escape without too much damage. They sailed into what is now called Cooktown, after Captain Cook, in far north Queensland, where they did repairs to the ship. Many of the crew got malaria from mosquitoes during this stop. Over 30 of the crew died from the disease. After the repairs, Cook returned to England and arrived in Deal on July the 2nd, 1771, having travelled some 30,000 miles in 3 years' time and charted over 5,000 miles of coastline to tell of his discoveries. For many reasons, we can say that Cook was an exceptional explorer. First of all, he was the first to circumnavigate the world on just one ship, and he was able to explore a great part of the Pacific Ocean, which had until then remained totally unknown to European man. His explorations thus contributed to the extension of the British Empire. What's more, he drew precise maps of those islands with greater detail than had ever been done before, and on a scale never previously achieved. He managed to do so only thanks to a combination of exceptional qualities. 1. He had an excellent mastery of seamanship. 2. He had superior surveying and cartographic skills, and had many qualities required to a scientist. 3. He showed physical courage. And 4. He was able to lead men in particularly harsh adverse conditions, and he took clever measures to fight scurvy. None of his crew died of that terrible disease. Due to the success of Captain Cook's voyage, he became a national figure and was even considered as a hero who was respected by everyone. As a result, he was promoted to the status of captain. Later on, he decided to go on 2 more expeditions in an attempt to find more discoveries. Captain Cook's second expedition took place from 1772 to 1775. This time, he took 2 ships, the Adventure, which was led by Tobias Fourneau, and the Resolution. His goal was to either search for the southern continent or prove that it didn't exist. He was also charged by the Royal Society and the British Admiralty to test a version of the John Harrison chronometer for longitude determinations. He sailed further south than any previous European mariner, below 71 degrees south latitude. He also visited Easter Island and discovered South Georgia Island and the South Sandwich Islands. Cook's reflections on his second voyage. I had now made the circuit of the Southern Ocean in a high latitude and traversed it in such a manner as to leave not the least room for the possibility of there being a continent, unless near the pole and out of the reach of navigation. By twice visiting the Pacific tropical sea, I had not only settled the situation of some old discoveries, but made there many new ones, and left, I conceive, very little to be done even in that part. Thus I flatter myself that the intention of the voyage has in every respect been fully answered, the southern hemisphere sufficiently explored, and a final end put to the searching after a southern continent, which has at times engrossed the attention of some of the maritime powers for near 2 centuries past, and the geographers of all ages. Cook's final expedition lasted from 1776 to 1779. He had 2 ships this time, the Discovery and the Resolution. The goal of this journey was to find a northwest passage across North America to Asia, but he searched the coast of Alaska to no avail. He also found the Hawaiian Islands, but at the time they were named the Sandwich Islands. There are different versions as to what happened next. According to one of them, Captain Cook and his men got along well with the natives of the Hawaiian Islands at first, but then things went bad when the natives stole a sailboat. So Cook tried to kidnap the chief in order to hold him as ransom for the boat, but in the attempt a fight broke out and he was killed by the natives on February the 14th, 1779. According to another version, Cook had been raised as a living god by the native priests, but when they realized that he was a mere human being like all of them, they decided to kill him in order to show that he was not immortal. Once Captain Cook's crew finally got his body back from the cannibal tribe, they saw that the tribe had stripped his body of all his flesh and burnt it on the fire. They had also cut out his heart and eaten it as a sign of respect to the explorer. Cook's crew wrapped his body in cloth and threw him at sea. Captain Gore then took the command of the ship. After Cook's death, Captain Clark attempted again to explore the northwest coast of America, but he failed to reach a point any further north than they had when Cook had been in command. They finally arrived home in 1780. Several goals had been accomplished during the journey. First, the proof that there was no viable northern passage. Second, the confirmation of the location of the Bering Strait. 3, the discovery of Hawaii. And 4, the opening up of interests in the Pacific and Arctic coast of America. The first European to set foot on Australia's east coast was Cook's nephew Isaac Smith. The Endeavour also had scientists aboard, including botanist Joseph Banks. They collected and recorded numerous plants and animals throughout their journey. 9 years after Cook's death, Joseph Banks initiated the idea of sending a lot of convicts on Botany Bay on the island of Australia. These new waves of white colonists totally changed the face of Australia. Tahiti was so nice and the natives so friendly that some of Cook's crew wanted to stay. The Maori warriors in New Zealand wore tattoos on their faces. Some of the Endeavour sailors got tattoos on their arms and started a tradition that continues today. As Cook was exploring during the American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin wrote to the captains of America's warships, telling them not to attack or harass Cook's ships.